Hi, everyone. Welcome to Wheel of Mind, the Wheel of Time point of view reread podcast. This season, we're reading Matt Cawthon's perspective. Welcome to Season 2, Episode 43. I'm your co host, Lajara Dane of the White Aja.
Hi, and I'm Giskell Simmeris, a scholar from Ilion. For any new listeners to our series, I want to remind you that The Wheel of Mind is an in depth character reread podcast. So, this right now is your only spoiler warning because we will, may, can, should drop spoilers from any moment of any book in the series at any time without any further warning. Now, today we're examining chapters 29 and 32 of A Memory of Light.
And before we dig into our chapter summaries, as we usually do, we're going to switch things up a little bit. We got a question from our patron, Malia, who asked, "Who's your favorite Wheel of Time character that you predict would be in very few people's top 10? What do you like about them, and why do you think other people don't like them as much?" So I'll get started with my character, but I'm going to preface that with my favorite characters change a lot. And so it depends on which reread you ask me, which reread I am in when you ask me that is probably going to change just about every time. So right now, just because of all of the time we've been spending in Matt's perspective and thus the time we've been spending around her, I'm really interested in Tuon. And I want to clarify because I know she's controversial. That's the point of the question. So I want to clarify that when I pick a favorite character here, I'm not talking about endorsing their actions, saying they're a good person. I'm talking about if they're written in an interesting and complex way. And I think Tuon is written in a way that can fuel a lot of debate or deep thinking because her motivations are complex and they seem to change over time. They tend to be pretty mysterious and then they get revealed little by little. And then every time we think we have her figured out, she's going to do something else that confuses us and Matt. But I mean, that being said, I could understand why many people probably wouldn't put her in their top 10. She has done very morally repugnant behavior. And so, depending on how you list your favorite characters, many people aren't going to put one that enslaves other people in their list of favorite characters. That is awful. But I think she's in my top 10 complex characters. I like watching her character develop in that we find out more about her, see how her motivations change, especially when she's in Matt's custody in Lucas' show. She gains admiration for him as she watches him fight her own people, which is interesting about her. She tells Noel that he has a good heart, which seemed sort of out of character for her to be so compassionate towards him. And then she wants to see a hell in Madeira and learn her new people's customs and things like that. So her motivations are confusing, they're interesting, they can spark discussion, they change throughout the story. She has hurt a lot of people. But one thing that's got me interested in her and thinking about where her story could go if it went beyond the books is that she has the potential to change. She has the potential to do a lot of work towards rectifying that. It's unclear whether she's going to use this power and this potential for good. She seems to be making some very small changes, but who knows whether those are sustainable. But I love character traits about our characters that seem like they could go either way towards being useful for being really good, make them a good hero, or make them a really good villain. Kind of like I said very early in this season, and maybe in season one as well, that I like folks like our Emmons Field 5 and Lan and Moiraine and Tom. They're interesting to me because they have character traits that are gray. I mean, character traits that have great potential to be very heroic or villainous. And I think Tuon similarly has this, and she's at a crossroads where she could start to use these for good. I don't know whether she will. And so, because of this complexity, she's a much better antagonist and villain, in my opinion, than people like the Forsaken. You know, she does very hurtful things to other people, but not out of just sadism like somebody like Cimarog does. She has misguided motivations that are not selfish. So, all that to say, yeah, Tuon's my controversial pick. What about yours, Giskell?
Mine would be Fail.
Ooh, that's a hot button one for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, yes, it is. At one point in time, I had wanted to do Fail for the 2nd season, of our character
hmm
reread, and thankfully, you
hmm
talked me out of that, but, she's not one of my favorite characters, but she's one that I like that does not appear in many people's top 10s. Um, I
mm.
do admire Fael's strength and yet her flexibility. Now, I understand why many people do dislike her. Um, she just needlessly frustrates Perrin. She does this quite often. she seems to have the thought that a fight with Perrin or a shouting match with Perrin is in indicative of a healthy relationship, and I don't think that's true. But I can chalk that up in my head canon to her being raised by parents who did argue loudly, and yet it's very clear they loved one another very deeply. So she grew up thinking that that's just normal. That's the way married couples should act. I don't think it's so much a Saldean thing, it's just the household in which she grew up. Plus,
Mhm.
she shows some measure of this teenage immaturity. You see the
Mm.
teenage angst that goes on at times. Yet you have to remember she is still a teenager. She is very young
Yeah.
and very impressionable. She's very hot-headed and quick to judgment. Yet at times she shows a lot of maturity and flexibility, and once she and Perrin are married, that she begins to adapt many of the Two Rivers customs, many of their ways of thinking, yet can still run an army camp in his absence, will do what's best for her husband, a la taking care of the prophet, when
Yeah.
he just didn't have the stomach to finish that job, and, as long as the prophet was gone, Perrin was okay with that. But even just I mean, after recently, coming out of captivity, one of the first things she did was hunt down Messima. So she's willing and able to
Yeah.
put aside her own comforts and whatever, she's facing, trials that she's facing at the time, to do what needs to be done, what's best not just for herself, but for her husband, and most importantly, for their people. And even if that causes her difficulty, she's willing to do that. You do see her tend to weaken a lot toward the end when, she's trying to deliver the Horn of Valir and they wind up in the Blight. And this is the point where you begin to see Fael's strength break down. Yet to me,
Mm.
that makes her seem more human. Um, and I
Yeah.
have always admired strong women, especially those who don't have to be harsh in order to be strong. Those who understand, sometimes being understanding and giving is a strength in itself as well, and who don't have to give up being feminine in order to be in control. And I think those things are very important, and I admire Fael because of many of those qualities.
Wow, thanks. Very well said. This was a really thought-provoking question, and I'm really excited that Malia asked it. I'm looking forward to more listener engagement like this in the future. So, if that's it for some of our, I guess, hot take faves discussion,
Yes.
let's go ahead and move on to your summary of chapter 29.
Thank you. Thank you. Chapter 29 is entitled The Loss of a Hill. Matt and Tuon rode alone toward a hilltop to oversee the battle. Of course, being alone meant that Selucia was there too, and General Galgan and Cortani, and Mian, of course, and about 100 of the Death Watch Guard. They overlooked the battle and saw and heard Demandred far away as he demanded that Lews Therin come face him in combat. Matt was going to steer as far away from any of the Forsaken as he possibly could. He also noted how Egwene's troops were really taking a beating here and were in danger of being overrun, while three banners of Seanchan cavalry stood off to one side, not engaging. He watched them in the looking glass and could see that Ty Lee was in charge of them and was not in a good mood. Asking for just a few minutes on his own, Matt rode off to see Ty Lee, skirting wide around the fighting. It seemed that she was under orders to stay out as a reserve unit, even though it was clear that they were needed in the battle right now. She even shared rumors of some other battles that had gone very poorly that morning. Matt assessed the situation, gave orders for one banner of her men to ride right up the middle of the fight, while she was to take one banner around the right flank of the Sharan army, and Matt would take the other banner around the left flank. She demanded that he wear some armor, which sounded like a good idea to Matt. Quote, a person could get hurt out there, what with arrows flying and blades swinging. End quote. Though he did keep his hat instead of wearing that stupid helmet. So, as he and his men took to the field, Matt encountered the Sharan heavy cavalry. Matt's unit was far lighter and faster and quickly shattered the Sharan lines, allowing Egwene's soldiers to regroup. Matt remained in the thick of the battle, slowly advancing a step at a time, keeping his Ashandarai flowing. Then some of the Soundshan soldiers around him disappeared. He turned to see them tied up in weaves of air, but they were quickly engulfed in flames. Another was thrown from his saddle by a weave of air. Matt saw the Sharon Channeler, a beautiful woman who reminded him somewhat of Tuon. Matt's medallion went cold as he advanced on her, jumped out of his saddle, and knocked her out. But he never slowed down, instead turning to face dozens of Sharon soldiers who kept running at him, coming on to him and his few remaining men. He and his men slogged through the red, churned up mud until there were no more Sharans left there to fight. Matt gave quick orders to the one remaining officer with him and had the men tie up the unconscious Chandler as Matt tore off one of those ridiculous lacquered fingernails they had split during the fighting and spit it out at the ground in front of the officer. The men around cheered Matt and looked up at him with awe as he gave orders for them to retreat back to camp, avoiding as much more of the fighting as they could. Tuon would not talk to him when he returned, which was always a bad sign. But he quickly explained that he had needed to feel the quote, pulse of the battle, end quote. Reports came in to Tuon then, and she brightened at the stories of Matt's prowess on the battlefield, of how he had raised the officer to the low blood by throwing a fingernail in front of him, and especially how Matt had single handedly captured a Marath Damane. That eased the way for Matt to make a very big announcement. You see, now that he had a much better understanding of the battle in his head, it was like a game of stones, and he could see it so much clearer now than he could on the maps alone. Matt said he could see a full 10 moves ahead, and he demanded to Tuon that he needed full control of the armies now. Full control of all of it, because Gareth Bryn was trying to lose this war.
Things are really heating up in the last battle, and this chapter has a lot of typical hilarious witticisms from Matt in the meantime, as he usually has when he's in sticky situations. He showcases his battle brilliance right here at the end, how you just recounted how he deduces so quickly that Gareth Bryn is sabotaging the battle plans. But what stood out to me most were more of clues that help me think about what comes next for Matt after the end of the story, just kind of extrapolating, much like I did in my explanation of my appreciation for Tuon. So, if you have any more kind of present moment focused in this chapter discussion points, I'm going to let you get into those first before I dig into some longer, bigger picture
Thank
ones.
you. I like the way this chapter starts out with some very lighthearted Matt moments.
Yeah.
And I have to say, for me personally, I appreciated them more, I believe, than I did previously. Within the last week, I listened to another Brandon Sanderson novel in the Reckoner series. Loved it.
Hmm.
We love Brandon Sanderson, but it's amazing to me how differently it's voiced. And I don't mean the audiobooks, but just the entire writing. When
Hmm.
I went back and reread this, it just really nailed how he was doing his best to finish Robert Jordan's book in the way Robert Jordan would have, because it's so
Mm,
different from Sanderson's other writings. And I think I needed to go back and read something else of his in order to be reminded of that. It's one of those things that I knew, but it helps to be reminded. So just starting out, he mentions how he had tried to get men because Min Farshaw is constantly there around Tuon. Tuon will not let Min Farshaw out of her sight, and he tried to talk men into giving a viewing about his hat, saying she saw the hat circling around him, so maybe Tuon would leave him
yeah.
alone about the hat, and I love that. That is so perfectly nailing Matt's character. I just that is awesome. Um, then we get a little interplay between he and Salucia when he's riding out or
Mm.
wanting to look at the battle, and Salucia is very upset. He's like, "I thought you'd be happy to have one more person to glare at." And she says this quote, "The Empress will follow where you go," she said. "So she will," Matt said, "as I'll follow where she goes, I suppose. I hope that doesn't lead us in too many circles." End quote. So I love the light-hearted beginning of this chapter because it's
Yeah.
very necessary to balance it with how intense the battle scene gets. And again, we've talked about this. Jordan has been masterful at this, and Sanderson again nailed it. And the pacing of the story being able to each chapter, balance things out, good and bad, lighthearted and serious. And I mean, otherwise, you could get so hyped up on adrenaline, it would be difficult to finish the battle scenes of the story. So,
Mhm.
seeing it from Matt's perspective, being able to balance that lightheartedness with the seriousness of what's to come is really awesome, and it's something you don't get in very many people's writings. So, it's one of the things I love about the Wheel of Time. It's one of the things that, to me, make it epic fantasy, and that it
Mm.
brings in all the seriousness and yet at the same time brings in the fun, the lightheartedness, in fact, the full spectrum of human emotions. So yeah, just one of the things that I noticed that I do really enjoy about going back and rereading this series. Um, I, of course, we had already learned prior to this what had gone on with some of the other great captains, and this is where
Yeah.
we're seeing it from Matt's perspective, discovering about Gareth Bryn. Now, I always thought it was a little odd that Matt had to, as he put it, feel the pulse of the battle, um, because for the most part, it seems like you can get more from an overview than you can from
Yeah.
looking at a microscope at this one little part of the battle. But I guess I
Mhm.
could just chalk it up in my head canon to Matt needing to be fully invested in it, not so much that he had to feel with what's going
Mm.
on with the battle, like he claims, so much as he needs to be fully invested in how serious this is in order to grasp that bigger picture. I don't know. Again, that's just my head canon trying to make sense out of the way he
Mhm.
described it. Because he described it like Nynaeve, could feel of a person's wrist to get a measure of what's going on in their heart and discover there's a problem in their foot, which I think is Matt's simplified version of it. But at the
Yeah.
same time, he needed to know what's going on in this little part, and he claims it's to understand what's going on in the larger picture. But I think it's just to be emotionally invested to the point that he's taking it seriously. It's not just numbers on a map, but it's people out on the battlefield, and now he can make these memories more real and use what he's got to win the battle. As far as being able to see several moves ahead, yeah, I can believe that. His tactical skills are second to none right now, and I do like that. I do like what's going on in the story. Just his explanation to me is a little skewed because of the source. Uh,
Yes, yeah, Matt is great at that double speak, as we know, from him. I mean,
yes,
that's incredibly common. So I think you're right about that. I didn't really think about that pulse of the battle thing very much, other than an overall impression of wouldn't the bird's eye view be better anyway?
right,
But
right.
I I wonder if there's just something I don't know about, war experience. Maybe there's something kind of ineffable about being in a battle that he's getting at there. I also wonder if the types of things he's interested in you can't see as well from above, so maybe there are some smaller pieces you want to see up close, like, um, a sense of your own forces and the others in terms of their fatigue or freshness, in terms of stuff like morale. You can get a little more of a sense of that when you see individuals, and maybe he talks about in the next chapter, I believe, just how reckless the Sharans seem to be, how they have no sense of self-preservation, and I
Uh,
think that's something you get more of a sense of from being there in person or from those, maybe at least some of the secondhand reports of hearing how they fight relative to your own forces, um, that might be harder to see from above. But I am always willing to chalk things up to Matt
yes,
doublespeak,
yeah.
so I think we're
Well,
probably both a little bit of column A, a little bit of
yes.
column B there.
Yeah, this is one of the first times I remember you successfully playing Forsaken's advocate on me. I'm usually doing that to
Yeah,
you, but,
you're right.
and when now that you said it, it does make sense. It I got the impression as you spoke of, just relating it to something from an American point of view, someone who grew up in the '80s with stories of the Vietnam War and when America first became involved in that. Many of the generals who were planning the things that were going on didn't understand how the Vietnamese would fight. They knew that they would, but
Yeah.
they didn't understand how they fought, their tactics, their techniques, the guerrilla warfare, the way they would bring that to bear. And we would go and, well, to tie this into the chapter, we would go and take a hill and say this gives us an advantageous position, and then they would find ways to just pick us apart. Because the
Mm.
generals knew about warfare, but they didn't know about how this enemy engaged in warfare. So, as you said that, I got that sense. Maybe Matt needed to see exactly how did this enemy engage in warfare, and how do I need to adapt, and then he could understand what was happening much better. I did not even think of that until you were speaking, and it became kind of clear to me. So, with Jordan's experiences in Vietnam, that may be similar to some of the things he was thinking.
Yeah, could be. And it was interesting how Matt didn't know until he got into the thick of it that his Ashendari was not useful here.
Right,
And
right,
that was kind of a scary moment because we've barely seen that. He struggled with it with the Golem, but he still actually found it useful even there.
right,
So the fact that this supernatural weapon, well, not exactly, but supernaturally acquired weapon that's been so lucky for him was had barely helped him skate out of there with his life
right,
was it just goes to show how different the Sharns were fighting than what he was used to, and he had to tell everyone that's part of what he could report, like, "Your swords are not gonna be useful here."
right. Yeah, grab some pole arms and things. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah,
Yeah, very good. Because I always wanted the Eshendera to be able to cut through armor, almost like a lightsaber, but it doesn't.
yeah.
It's
No.
not indestructible, and neither is Matt. So yeah, I think together we both came up with a much clearer image of this chapter than either one of us did when we approached it. So
Totally.
really, that's all I've
I
got that
think
I wanted to bring
Oh,
forward. Just yeah.
okay. Well, one of the smaller things I noticed was that Matt got a new servant by accident, which he hasn't had a servant in forever.
Yes.
We know uh, after he lost Lopin. So Matt accidentally got this new retainer by raising this soldier to the low blood, and then Tuon was like, "Good job, now he's your guy,"
Right.
all the time. Elaine told us, "Oh, you're definitely gonna get a servant," when he was wearing that really ratty coat, but we never actually saw that happen. He's still never mentioned one until now. So I don't know if he's had like particular servant been sticking by him this whole time, or if it's just been kind of rotating Daco Vale since he's been with the Shan Chan. But um, I mean, he acquired this guy because he inspired so much loyalty. Everyone who saw and heard about how he fought just gained so much more reverence for him than he had before,
Right. Right.
or than they had before. So he really raises in status. And unfortunately, though, part of the way that he raises in status among the Shan here and gains some clout is by capturing a channeler. In that moment, he wasn't really thinking about it. He was trying to find a way to incapacitate this woman who was trying to hurt them without killing her. I found it interesting that he didn't seem to feel bad about fighting a woman. He hit her on the head really hard, which normally he would have been kind of squeamish about or
Right.
something, right? But he's starting to get a little bit more cutthroat in order to save his life. He's been through too many close calls with women,
Yes.
so he had to kind of overcome that instinct a little bit to see them as safer or in need of
Right.
protection. But now, since he captured this woman, he didn't realize it at the time, but that means that he is her Damane, and that's troubling to him and probably to most of us readers, right? We don't want Matt to be a slave owner. That's really uncomfortable for all of us, and for this woman especially. He does think about, okay, well, I guess since I'm the one who has this demonic, maybe I can free her at some
Right.
point. So I like that that's the first place he
Yes.
goes
Yes.
because, at some of this point, it seems like he's been starting to get a little more comfortable with the demonic thing, kind of because he has to. He's like using them in battle, and he's surrounded by Daco Vale and Sojin and stuff like this all the time. So he's sort of got a degree of complicity in this system by being the Prince of the Ravens. But here we see the seeds of change being planted in Shanshan society, which his being there already does, and Tuon knowing about her ability to learn to channel and stuff like that. So here I see this potential for him to use his newfound clout with the Shanshan to change the society. So we talked about how in previous episodes his continuing to kind of flout Shanshan customs could have gone a couple of different ways, right? It
Right.
could just be, okay, he's a weird foreigner, or it could serve as a model. And I think now, because people are starting to look up to him, they've seen, oh, this is not just some clown. um, he's starting to really put cracks in Tuon's worldview and perhaps in the worldview of many other Shan-Chan who are kind of high up. And so my headcanon is that this really is the start of some massive changes to improve the lives of the many people that the Shan-Chan hold, that they currently enslave, and people down the road like the Aiel, because we see the Shanshan in Avienda's visions persecuting the Aiel. And so I hope that those visions aren't set in stone and that this is starting them down the path of becoming better.
Oh, wow. I like that. Um, yeah, as you have mentioned so many different times how our characters seem to fail upward, and that's exactly
Yeah.
what happened to Matt here. I mean, once he got in the thick of the battle, it's just, I'm trying to survive. But, by
Yeah.
doing so, once he was on foot, the Ashendari was great. It's when he's from horseback that it was just a very clumsy weapon. But once he's on foot, facing all these foot soldiers, has taken out the channeler, which he not only knocked her out, he cut her feet out from under, then knocked her in the back of the head, left her face down
Yeah.
in the mud, so she would have died
Yeah.
had others not pulled her up and tied her up. But, he
Mhm.
goes into this full battle mode of you facing dozens of enemy soldiers, and he's taking them out with the Ashendera until the ground around him is just churned up mud and blood. And, and the
Mm.
few survivors of the Seanchan that were with him are standing there wide-eyed, like, "I can't believe we just did that." And even Matt has this moment of, "How many people did I just kill?" Because he's just looking
Yeah.
around, the charring bodies everywhere. So, he went in almost, in my mind, berserker mode here. This
Mhm.
fight or flight, and he fought hard. So I like seeing, that perspective of Matt, that he will, you know, fight to protect the people he loves, and things like that. But it surprised him just where he went with this. So,
Mhm. Totally.
it's of course, him tearing off the broken fingernail, spitting it on the ground in front of the officer. He has no idea he's raising that guy to the low blood, and they're
Yeah.
already just in awe of him. And this officer is like,
Yeah.
people would never dare question the Empress, but if they did, they will never do it again about you, the Prince of the Ravens," and everybody's cheering. At one time, that would have been the exact situation Matt would have loved. Back in the Two Rivers, had he done something and everyone cheered, Matt would have, he would have right then decided he was had died and go to tell him Ranriad, because there was,
Yeah.
just there was no way anyone would ever have treated him that well. And he's in this situation, and all he can think about is, well, let's get back and, see what kind of mood Tuon is in.
Yeah. It's interesting that he gains all this new status kind of falling into his lap this late in the story. I mean, we've only got 2 Matt episodes left, so we're closing in very close to the end of his arc, and it
Right.
it just feels like this should be the beginning of something, and I
Yeah.
think that really speaks to. I mean, not only does he need to gain all this clout kinda last minute so he can really have the Shan behind him and to get everyone behind him in the last battle
Right.
here soon, but I think also it does speak to the fact that Robert Jordan was thinking about exploring Matt and Tuon's story further in some Outrigger novels or
Right.
something that like, it feels like there is supposed to be more to Matt's
Yes.
story. So, I think it's a fun such a fun time for speculation. I love that everything is so kind of unresolved with the Shan-Chan, because it allows us to have such interesting discussions and headcanons, and I think Matt leveling up this late in the game really gives us more
Yes,
space to do that.
I agree, and I never thought about how this seems like a beginning of other things, but, among the Xianchan especially, it definitely is. I just needed you to point that out to fully appreciate it, but it is definitely a beginning, in a new beginning in his relationship with the Xianchan, because up until now, even the other generals have kind of, thought, "Well, he's good, but he's Tuon's pet." He went from being
Yeah.
Tylen's pet in many people's minds to now being Tuon's pet. And there are a few people who've
Mhm.
seen through it, but not many people. This is where the awakening of Seanchan society, of the high blood, become awakened to really who he is and what he's capable of. I had not seen that till you said it, but I did enjoy that perspective.
And those are pretty much my thoughts for chapter 29. Did you have any others?
No, thank you.
All right, well, I'll go ahead and move on to my summary of chapter 32, A Yellow Flower Spider. Matt is overlooking the battlefield using a gateway made by his newly captured Damane. He marvels at the usefulness of this method for revolutionizing warfare. He's also getting some piercing stares from his wife and thinking of her as practically Aes Sedai. But at the same time, he admires her regal attitude when she gives orders, better than Elaine or Nynaeve or the best of them. The Sul'dam praises how quickly this new Damane has taken to her role. She was considered fully trained within hours instead of the weeks it normally takes, and learned the gateway weave just from watching Aes Sedai, which is, by the way, a term that Matt ordered everyone to use instead of Marth Damane, an order which Tuon, puzzlingly, has yet to rescind. Matt feels some conflict when he looks at the Damane. He saved her life and rescued her from fighting for the Shadow, so is slavery a better fate than that, or not? He feels guilty for handing Tuon another enslaved channeler instead of continuing to try to convince her to abandon the practice altogether. Either way, though, this gateway ability will go far in preventing some of the fatal tactical mistakes he has experienced from his ancient memories, he thinks. As useful as this gateway is, it might still not be enough to disentangle the subtle mess that Gareth Bryn had made of their battle plans, right in plain sight, like a yellow flower spider crouching on a petal. General Galgan, also looking on the field, reflects on the implications of this new gateway technology too and how it's going to change warfare. And he also, at Tuon's prompting, expresses his admiration for the Prince of the Ravens and quietly promises to show his appreciation by making his assassination attempts easy to fend off, at least at first. After being flabbergasted by such an open admission that the man will make attempts on his life, Matt gets back to strategizing. It's hard to predict what Demandred will do with the Shar and Channelers, and it's especially concerning how they seem to have no sense of self-preservation. He wants to use Damane to keep the river illuminated overnight to protect against any sneak attacks, and to set up a perimeter of the women around the camp to detect any channeling. But the Aes Sedai will have to be forbidden from channeling even to light a candle, which surely that's not going to make them happy. Due to the Trollocs continuing to press and wear down their forces at their current position, Matt and Galgan decide that they need to abandon this ground to choose better. So they need to talk to the Aes Sedai about it. Trouble is, the Amerlin and the Empress refuse to travel to each other's offices, so Matt exasperatedly suggests they just have a Zoom meeting, a gateway meeting, that is, instead. While messages are being sent by runners to Egwene to check on the acceptability of the meeting plan, since they can't just send a virtual calendar invitation with the Zoom link, Tuon begins asking her doomsayer men for visions of the people in the room, with men pushing back about how the Empress chooses to use her gift. One man has a symbol indicating he will get married. Tuon then forbids him to marry until after the last battle and orders him put on the front lines, since he'll have to survive the battle and his forces will thus probably be secure. For one woman in the room, Tuon interprets Min's viewing of a white boar as indicating an assassination attempt from a rival noble house and orders the woman executed. Min vehemently protests, saying the woman should be watched but not punished for what she might do. She also uses her position as truth speaker to demand that her viewings be communicated only privately and interpreted with far more caution than they currently are. Tuon appears to respect Min's boldness and her challenge, and she agrees. Then the gateway opens to reveal Egwene on the Amerlin seat. Matt thanks her, a bit vulgar in the wording perhaps for present company, but for letting him control the White Tower's forces. He insists that they must cede this ground and find better footing. Egwene at first resists giving any ground to the Shadow, but Matt replies using a Hawkwing quote, which further raises his clout in the Shan Chan eyes, to imply that they have more to gain later by retreating here and now. The Aes Sedai agree and update them about Bryn's state and other news. The general was under compulsion, as far as they can tell, without having Nynaeve to confirm the weaves on his brain, because she's the only person who can see them. It's also not just him, though. Davram Bashir and Egelmar Jagad have been compromised, while Rodel Ituralda's status is unknown. He's currently missing in action. Matt insists that they need a strong, unified stand because of all these generals having been compromised. Elaine then comes through her own gateway into the Amerlin's tent and reports that her forces have saved Kyrian from the Trollocs. She and the Aes Sedai, after some debate, agreed to Matt's idea of a unified last stand on the fields of Merilor where they had originally started, and in allowing him to lead the forces of the light. And then, chapter 32, A Yellow Flower Spider, ends with a brief Galad perspective where we see Tam Thor, Matt, Elaine, and other movers and shakers decide to circulate a wee bit of propaganda, spinning their retreat as a victory to keep up morale for what's to come.
This is one of those chapters that's bittersweet because it it shows just how much damage have been done to the good guys and how they have to
Yeah.
retreat and go back to the very place they started there at the fields of Merilor. And I'm like the Egwene in this one. I don't like the thought of giving up ground. I don't like the thought of
Mhm.
having to, break off from these several fronts and pull it all together into one battle. it does make sense, and let's face it, there is a prophecy of there being a last battle, not a last series of battles. So I guess
Yeah.
in that light, it makes sense as well. But it's one I just do not like. Now we know it's because of the shadows manipulations. We know it's what they have done to these great generals, Grendel specifically, and how they've corrupted them and put compulsion on them from the dream world, no less, which is something we didn't realize was possible until we'd gotten to this part in the
Yeah.
story. But it it's still to me it seems a lot like losing, and I don't like our guys losing. To me, the good guys should never lose. You know, first they hold the high ground, then they let the Sharans take it, and then they have to take it back again, which again tactically just sounds ridiculous. It's
Yeah.
something that puts you at a terrible disadvantage, but Matt was trying to draw them out and weaken them, and you know through an entire series of things. So in my mind, those battle scenes have always meshed together into one. And I don't know but what in the show it will be one big battle. They won't spread it out in four different fronts and then bring it back together. I think it'll probably start and end at the field of Marilor, just for simplification. But I want them to stand firm and win. But we see they can't. They're too weakened. But I mean, it's sort of like the Empire Strikes Back. I hate seeing the good guys
Mhm.
lose a base, lose a field, lose a heel, have to retreat, have to regroup.
Yeah, I hear you. I think I agree with why all these decision makers in that short Galad perspective had to spin this differently for everyone else. They're like, "No, we have to think about this as a victory because everybody's already so exhausted and we have no time for everyone to rest." So, we pretty much have to tell them that this was a victory for the light because I don't think there's any other way we're gonna have the stamina to win this kind of last
Right,
stand. Galad, of course, who's always, he sticks to his principles and he will always do what's right. Supposedly, he's like, "Oh, you can't lie to people," you know? But I think he's eventually brought around to the reasoning as well, which is part of his character development. That's an interesting, argument for one of those, top 10 that might not be in most other people's top 10
ah,
characters.
yes,
Galad. There's one. Didn't think of till just
yeah,
now.
yeah. Except I like Gawain better than Galad. Shoot me, but I do.
Ooh, now that's a hot take. We're gonna have to talk about that in a bonus episode or something. Have a Glad versus Gowan.
Yes, that's a controversial statement. Yeah, I know I just tanked our listenership with that one phrase, but
So one thing I like about this chapter is just seeing Matt be continue to be irreverent. I do like that. It's one of those fun parts of his personality that would drive me bonkers in person, but it's really funny in a book character. he um he hasn't lost this lack of respect for noble and royal positions. He swears when he's conducting this important meeting with the Aes Sedai. He still calls Tuon by her old name, and she hasn't killed him for it yet. Somehow he puts his feet up on tables and stuff. This irreverence is just really fun. And I also think, though, that this casualness is part of what makes people admire him so much because when they see all of his achievements, but that they're done with this casual air, it makes it look really effortless. He's just effortlessly cool, you know? And so I think it's funny that he thinks he has to keep an eye out for Min because of how she challenges Tuon's authority, but he could just as easily be talking about himself. He really should be watching out too. If Min Farshaw is on thin ice, Matt probably is too.
yes, yes,
Similar to the his irreverence issue, Matt is very picky and choosy about his words. He's very stubborn about the words that he uses for certain people at certain times. And I think that he recognizes the power of words. So part of what I'm talking about here is how he has this lack of respect for noble titles and stuff like that. But um, he's also insisting on calling Aes Sedai instead of Marath Damane. I think it bodes well for Shan-Chan society, for their relationship with channelers, that Tuon has not rescinded that order. She's just let it stand. And I hope that through that, Matt is able to start changing hearts and minds about channelers. So I'm glad to see Matt holding firm about that language because I think words can be powerful. And when it comes to discussing the Shanchan, I personally even though it's all fictional, I feel a little bit gross sometimes using the Shanchan terms like Suldam and Damane, Dakovale, Sojin. I do these things just for clarity's sake in discussing the text that we're all reading, but it almost feels like that I'm endorsing their dehumanizing classifications of people when I use
Right,
those terms.
right.
And I guess I'm just treating it similarly to how I try to be careful with my words in real life because I think they can reflect how you think about people. And so Matt knows that on some level, even if it's kind of unconscious and he does this sort of off the cuff. He's trying to instill some respect among the Shanchan for Aes Sedai on their terms by calling them what they prefer to be called. And then on the other hand, he challenges authority by not calling authority figures what they prefer to be called.
Right.
So he uses this disregard for people's preferred terms. It seems like he's only punching up. He's never really punching down at oppressed people when he does this. He's only punching up at authority. Um, Maybe to try to equalize a little bit and kind of pull the nobles kind of down to his level and strip away some of that power that he sees as arbitrary or unnecessary because we know he's always had this complex about
Oh,
nobles.
yes. Well, and that's part of the bad guy persona. That's part of the bad guy image. Not that he's a bad person or a mean person, but he is the rogue, the James Dean of the group or the Han Solo of the group, and he loves the underdog. He loves the little guy, and he loves to see the little guy succeed. He would very much be cheering on David in David versus Goliath. Now he wouldn't have taken on Goliath if he could help it, but he would definitely cheer
Right.
on David. So, exactly like you said, he's not punching down. He's not using his authority to belittle people. In fact, if you remember in our last episode when some of the Dakovale were trying to, dress it, or maybe it's a Sojin. I'm sorry, I'm probably using the wrong term, but he kept trying.
There were one of each
Yes,
in that scene, so it's
he was trying to get the
yeah.
young girl to raise her eyes, and she said, "No, that would lower my eyes." Well, you're already staring at my feet. It's not. They can't be any lower. So just look up at me. I just want you to make eye contact with me. Even in those small
Yeah.
things, he's trying to change the culture by acknowledging the humanity of those people who are around him, and
Mhm.
by, like you said, not acknowledging the authority of those people above him, or at least not in the ways they want him to. Because if
Yeah.
he did, if he acknowledged them in the ways they wanted to, he would be a part of them. He would be a part of their society. So Matt is able to
Yeah.
be in Xianchen culture. He's able to win their admiration. He's able to lead their armies, and yet not become part of who they are, not fall down or sink
Mhm.
down to their level in what he sees as the bad things that they do. Um, yeah, I think
Yeah.
it's actually very strong. Takes a very strong personality to do that. Not many people can. Most people, at some point, we learn to shut our mouths and you go along just to get along. Especially in a culture that
Yeah.
is oppressive, that has no value for human life, and we definitely see that among the Xiantian. That's one of their big weaknesses. They do not value the human life. It's everything is subservient to the state, or everything is subservient to the empire, and everyone is
Mhm.
subservient to it. And life is cheap and expendable, even for good guys, even for those who are loyal to the empire. Their lives are cheap and disposable as far as the empire is concerned.
Yeah.
As long as the empire itself stays together and the empress is in control, everything else is subservient to that, and everything else is secondary to that. Everything else is disposable. But Matt doesn't see it that way. So it's twice as hard or 10 times as hard to retain a sense of identity of who you are when you're in a
Mm.
society that cheapens identities. And that's the
Mm.
very thing that can lose your life is standing up to live your life your way, to the individuality. That could lead us, if we were inclined, into a deep discussion of between the rights of an individual and the rights of an all-consuming state or government. And
Mhm.
here we see Matt. He's dancing across that line over and over, just daring them to hurt him, daring them to take his life. Uh, he knows Tuon doesn't want to do it, but he continually does things that would have anyone else with a silken cord around their neck. But he's doing it,
Absolutely.
he's pushing in order to just to make them see, "Hey, this is wrong." And
Mhm.
I don't think he is getting that philosophical with it. To him, it's just, "Well, these people are crazy. Let me, just ignore them and, treat them this way."
Yes,
But he's doing those things, but he doesn't have the deep philosophical, uh, introspection of why he's doing it. He just does it
of
because
course.
these people are crazy and they ought to be more normal like him.
It's just his nature to do that. It's as if his personality was perfectly prepared to be the person who could be in this position to start making some changes to the Shanchan, to promote, a little bit more peace and stability for the whole continent. It's gotta be because, he's gotta make sure they're gonna honor that treaty with Rand. I mean, he was there to even make sure it happened in the first place.
Right, right.
I really think he's gonna be there to help make sure that they don't persecute the Aiel.
Yes.
There are some things that cast some doubt. I really find it interesting, now frustrating in a way, where we want the good guys to win and we don't want these bad things to happen. But I see enough ambiguity here, in figuring out what the Shanchan are going to do because it really could go a couple of different ways. We see these seeds of change, and we see Matt just casually being his stubborn self, kind
Mhm.
of seeding these little by little. But what we also see him doing is helping them technologically very quickly. He's giving them a lot of military advantages, which is great for this short term last battle right now. He's giving them, captured channelers who can now make gateways. That's new for them. He's got Eludra's dragons. That's now theirs. Basically, he's doing all this to help the unified side of the light in the last battle. But it does raise questions for what they're going to do with all that technology afterward. So we see these seeds of change, but I wonder if the social change can keep up with the technological ones because if they're still mostly the same people as they are right now, right after the last battle, they're still the Shanchan with bigger guns now. And I think that's a big problem. And I also think that since they don't have an enemy at that point, because they do have this peace treaty and everything else, they could find something else to do with these weapons that are just kind of lying around. Societies do that. I mean,
Yes.
you can see how in the United States we changed policing and surveillance of our own citizens after the Cold War because we had a lot of like spy technology. We had a lot of military technology that was built up with kind of nowhere to put it.
Right, right,
And so I think any society can do that. So they're already not exactly a surveillance state. It's almost like this panopticon thing where people assume they're always being watched by a listener or something like
right,
that. But I
right,
think they could ramp up that risk, because they'll just have bigger guns and more quicker ways of transmitting information to be able to do the things that already make the Shanchan an ugly
right.
society. So I just wonder, you can't tell it's kind of a race between the social changes and these technological changes that could just enable the things that are already ugly about their culture.
Right. To use an overused term, you could definitely see them, uh, getting introspective with their military and forming a Gestapo and, things of that
Right,
nature to
right.
be even more oppressive, unless they, can break free of that. Now, a lot of the people in the captured lands, or the occupied lands, I guess we'll call them, they've learned to enjoy the stability of the Xiantian rule.
Yeah.
They've learned to enjoy the, uh, somewhat equality of law that exists among the Xiantian rule, but I don't think they would handle it well with more oppression, of just a common
Right.
everyday man. So you would think there would be more of an uprising or something if that happened, if they're
Probably, yeah.
capable of it. And let's face it, the Xiantian, once they came in and took over, they didn't just disband the Altarian armies and things. They started using them. Here you go.
Yeah.
Here's how we fight, and now you're going to be under this general. They use those people rather than just replacing them or getting rid of them or disbanding them. So they have a lot of people from Murundi, from these other countries that they've taken over, that are well trained in military, well supplied, well stocked in the military, who could have an uprising if things got bad enough. So
Yeah.
I could definitely see that could go a lot of different ways. Either a well equipped, well armed people could free themselves from Xiantian rule, or the Xiantian could become more oppressive. Or as we can see from
Mhm.
Avienda's visions, it becomes known as the Empire of the Ravens. You, you know, which they just
Mm,
kind of
yeah.
chose to not go back to Xianqian, but just have their empire here in those countries they already controlled. And as you said, use that technology that they have against the IEL, who's really the only enemy left that they can fight legally. Um, and it
Yeah.
even talked about how things had been better under the old empress, but not the new ones that came after. So you
Mm,
kind of got the feeling that Matt and Tuon changed that potential future. They changed the track a little bit,
yeah.
but it wasn't able to survive their passing.
Yeah, and that seems very realistic. I don't know, this world feels so lived in and that you can tell that it continues after the end of the story. It's believable, you know?
Right. Yes, yes. Because we get glimpses of the far past and the far
Yeah.
future both in such a ways that the story seems contiguous, not just and of course, I know that some of these are potential futures, just as Rand in the Dark One played around with creating different
Mhm.
possibilities, different futures. There were things that could happen, but were not set in stone. So we get a lot of ideas, though, of the continuity of the
Yeah.
story, as you said. And I love that. That's one of the things that provides so much richness to it, is it's not just what happened on paper, but it's the feeling we have of how all of our characters keep living, or many of our characters
Yeah.
keep living, and many of the cultures and societies continue to live and evolve as cultures and societies do.
Mhm.
And we have many different tracks they can take. So it may go down that track, or you have the feeling Matt and Tuan can change it, or they can go back to Xianchen and start the change there and come up with something totally different. There's just so many different ways it can go. Or, like I said before, it can become more oppressive and more um, controlling of its people until no one really likes them anymore. Whereas of right now, there's only a small percentage that are oppressed. The rest of the people enjoy more freedoms. So there's a lot of different ways this can go.
Yeah, and I see now why people, do tabletop role-playing games of the 4th age because you can just endlessly explore these ideas.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I love thinking about these counterfactuals. I mean, those are my favorite parts of the story is when we get those glimpses, those possible futures or the alternate worlds, the flickers in the portal stones, um, the accepted tests. So many points where you just think about what might have been or what if things go a little bit differently or how is this going to turn out and it's almost like historical fiction within this fantasy series itself, which I really enjoy.
Yes, yes. And I think we all love to play what if. What if I had done a little differently in my
Yeah.
past here, or changed something there? Taken a different major in college or dated a different person. We could all play those what if games within our minds. And it almost makes you wish that, through quantum mechanics, we could get those flickering views of what our lives could have
Mhm.
been, or perhaps what our lives could be. We could take a path, that would improve everything. But of course, I think we're more likely to bore a hole in the Dark One's prison first.
Yeah, I think so.
With all of our super colliders, that's what they're doing. I know it.
Yep. That's why we get into the science fiction of the Wheel of Time here, folks. We're just warning you.
Yes, yes. Oh, but that's all I have on this one, unless you have some other takes on this.
No, that's about it.
Okay, man, it's been a fun one. If nothing else, just fun to discuss some of these, like you said, science fiction ideas we come up with. Um, but yeah, I do really enjoy that. I get into that. Alternate history is one of my jams.
Yeah.
Alternate, fictitious history is one of my jams. Something I've really enjoyed once I discovered it. And here in the Wheel of Time, you get that built in. It's part of it. And I hope all of our listeners continue to enjoy us exploring this as we go into these things. And I hope you'll all join us next time as we get into episode 44, where we'll cover chapters 36, 39, and 40 from A Memory of Light.
Subscribe to Wheel of Mind on Podbean, Stitcher, Google Play, Apple, Spotify, or YouTube. And that last one is under the name Lajara Dane, Lajaradayne, to get notified when a new episode drops just about every Wednesday. Leave us feedback by rating and reviewing on your preferred podcast listening platform or by contacting us through email or on Twitter at mind_wheel, or you can find me personally at Lajara Sadai. And to support the show for just $3 a month, you can get access to some perks. Visit our Patreon at patreon.com/Wheel of Mind. This is not the ending to the turning of the Wheel of Mind, but it is an ending.
So you are Doctor Who again?